High-quality games can take a long time in production. Well, I suppose terrible games can take a long time too, as we often witness in the industry. From our experience, we find even the most seasoned game studios continuously struggle to estimate accurate timelines for their games. But exactly how long is a reasonable development timeline, and should it make a difference when it's an indie title? I mean, we'd all be happier if early access could be reached in just 6 months of development, but for most genres, that's not realistic, excluding hyper-casual games, of course. Now, for a typical game, you'd be doing very well to reach early access in around a year for simpler titles if planned meticulously. However, if delivering a functional vertical slice instead, which is a short but feature-complete version of the full game, 3 to 6 months may be sufficient. Keep in mind though, while it can be relatively easy to make a vertical slice for a game such as Tetris or Super Meat Boy, but what about the slice for World of Warcraft? That's going to take some more time, obviously. There is also another key component. The sad reality is, achieving the aforementioned timelines is not likely for first-time developers or teams who have not launched substantial titles before, as experience is one of the most important factors for rapid prototyping. Now that being said, if you do want to defy the odds with a 1-year dev cycle for an incredible game and want to work with our studio, let us know. Okay, that's enough self-sponsoring. Let's go through some games that managed to get to early access at an impressive speed and see if there's something to learn from them. We'll start with The Binding of Isaac, a game we briefly touched on in our previous video. The super successful roguelike that was one of the modern pioneers of the genre. In Binding of Isaac, almost every room has a near identical structure, and only RNG layouts and items needed a lot of iteration. Oh, and of course, boss mechanics. Also, it was oddly developed in Adobe Flash's ActionScript 2, which is not commonly used but easier to get initial development progress. This is back when Newgrounds was still popular, once upon a time. The developers did state that had they known Binding of Isaac would actually be successful, they would not have picked this engine. Still, there are some positives. Because of ActionScript 2, they actually managed to achieve a 3-month sprint to an early playable prototype, and that is pretty impressive when compared to what Unity can achieve on the same timescale. The next game is Don't Starve. The semi-open world survival roguelike was also pretty fast to get into a beta test, as it took them less than 12 months. This is quite impressive given the quality of the title. The game had the advantage of being part of a game jam prior, as some preliminary work had already been complete. However, Klei Entertainment was not truly indie, as they are a full studio with around 30 to 35 developers at the time, but only a small number of them worked on Don't Starve. The gameplay loop of simply trying to survive is well defined within the title, and with almost zero storyline and narrative design, helped with the development speed substantially. The final example is Hotline Miami, and they managed a pretty fast release. The title is a gruesome top-down action game that makes GTA look sensible, and took around 9 months to finish. Did you know the team worked with almost zero budget? Not advised, by the way. We can only assume they were living off instant noodles and canned sardines during that period, a sad reality for a lot of indie developers. Another weird choice for an engine, by the way, Game Maker. This dev cycle was a bit different, since the developers had already worked on many previously unreleased prototypes. In fact, they had over 150 unfinished minigames, and Hotline Miami was just one of them. I guess making a huge number of minigames does sort of help experience-wise. More is better in this case. Either way, all of that practice did help them ship Hotline Miami, and the simplicity of the game definitely made it easier. You know what? 9 months is pretty good going. From all the aforementioned examples and postmortems from GDC, there's obviously a strong trend to getting to a vertical slice or early access rapidly. Our studio's first-hand experience tells us that some of the most important game features for faster development timelines are the experience of the lead producer as well as the development team, simple narrative design, having basic to no storyline helps, The genre also makes a big difference. Being roguelike, for example, is good. And having a repetitive core loop really speeds things up. And obviously, try avoiding multiplayer, as this makes things far more complex than needed. No multiplayer unless you absolutely have to. Anyway, that's great and all for ideal development cycles. But why don't we discuss a more real-life scenario rather than idealized timelines, where a developer began with not as much commercial experience? What if you worked alone, for example, with less experience and almost no budget? A fantastic example is developer Toby Fox. When Toby started working on his own game, he had very little experience creating anything more sophisticated than ROM hacks at the time. Aside from Earthbound ROMs, he had not worked on any major commercial titles and did not have formal programming experience either. Despite all the challenges, to best utilize his resources, or lack thereof, Toby went with incredibly basic NES/SNES graphics. Well, here's the thing. Toby actually spent his time on the right priorities. He focused on the story, dialogue, and impactful gameplay mechanics since it was less technically demanding. He also focused on music, since Toby has more of a composing background in sound design, which is also the right strategic move to make. Okay, time to do the big reveal. In the end, it took Toby almost 3 years to finish his game, and that game was Undertale. Now, what made Undertale spectacular was its sheer unapologetic originality with very compelling character design. All of the reasons why it took so long to finish despite leveraging off GameMaker. This was a very high-risk move, since there's no game quite like Undertale in modern gaming and won't be again for quite some time. It was officially released on September 15th, 2015, and was very well received. On Metacritic, it was the third highest rated PC game released that year and is often considered among the top 50 games of all time. That's quite an accomplishment for 3 years of work alone, given the odds. To be honest, what we have described here is the most common game dev story for most indie teams, including ours when we first started off. But that's the point, isn't it? As a solo dev, you need to focus on the elements that actually matter to gameplay, not superficial content, which is what most AAAs seem to be drawn to based on where the industry is heading. Anyway, so what have we learned? I suppose that the development time for an indie game is highly variable, influenced by numerous factors. While there are general timelines and successful examples to learn from, indie games are broad and can take anywhere from 6 months to 10 years to finish. Now, if you want to avoid being stuck in game dev hell forever, make sure the team is well prepared. Or alternatively, if you'd like to hire our studio to work on a mind-blowing title, let us know.